one man who knew Liam Treadwell extremely well and has spoken extremely eloquently about mental health, the challenges of being in this industry and the challenges of being a jockey and a top-flight sportsman and the ups and downs that that brings with it, is former rider Kevin Tobin. I'm very pleased to say that Kevin joins me now. Kevin, good morning to you. Welcome to Luck on Sunday.
Good morning, Nick. How you doing?
I'm well, thank you. It's been a very difficult week for everyone in the racing community. You have talked very openly about your struggles with mental health. First of all, I'd like to send you my best wishes and condolences for what you must be feeling on behalf of Liam's friends and family this week.
Nick, thank you very much for that. And of course, you know, it is exceptionally difficult, and the first thing I want to do this morning is send my deepest and most heartfelt condolences to Liam's family and friends. Also, you know, to Rose's family and friends, and I know you in particular had a special relationship with Liam and Rose. Yeah, it's just incredibly difficult. I don't think there's a way or necessarily a method we should all be using. It's just, these things are just very, very difficult to deal with.
Kevin, tell me a little bit about your own experience in the saddle and the difficulties you faced marrying a career as an aspiring sportsman with trying to keep yourself well, to keep your mind in the right place.
Yeah, so Nick, first of all, you know, racing was very, very good to me. You know, I had a great time in racing. Some of the best days of my life were in racing, and, you know, essentially everything I have today is somewhat down to racing. Having said that, racing has a uniqueness about it that I found exceptionally difficult. And if you'll indulge me for a second, like, you know, a lot of sports people have a lot of pressures to deal with. If you play professional football, and you play, whether you play for Liverpool or you play down the leagues, you know, you've got pressure to perform. Having said that, you're in a team environment, and even if you're not the one that's the star of the show or winning the game for your team, there's every possibility that those in the changing room with you are doing so, and as a result, you're a winner or you're a loser as part of a larger team. Racing doesn't have that. It is an individual sport. Now, you compare that to the best snooker players, the best golfers, the best boxers. Yeah, and they too have to put up with those pressures that jockeys have to put up with. However, when Rory McIlroy or, you know, Jordan Spieth have a bad day on the golf course, number one, they won't be going home in an ambulance, and number two, they themselves get to decide when they're going to go out on the golf course again to compete. That is not the case in racing, and that's what the constant grind of that is essentially where I found I couldn't handle. I was looking at the paper every day, hoping that something would happen, that I would get on a horse that would potentially win a race or be a better horse. And then eventually, over the course of time, it became, I guess, too much of a grind, Nick, if that makes sense. The idea of having to constantly compare where I was with the next guy. 3 or 4 of us would constantly travel to the races. Guys I was friendly with, Sam Jones, Gerard Tumilty, Richard Killoran, Liam himself, would go to the races, and in order for me to have a particularly good day, my best friends couldn't have a good day, and vice versa. If they had a particularly good day, that meant I couldn't have a good day because they were winning the races I was in.
And Kevin, when it came to transitioning away from racing, what was it that made you feel that you couldn't really carry on in this career?
There was 2 things, Nick, that really jump out at me when I think back at it. One, I was riding in Catterick one day, and I remember the horse stepped at the first fence. It was a hurdle race today, and the horse stepped at the first hurdle for me. And normally you would make some sort of an effort as a jockey to correct that, so that the next hurdle we came to, the horse would jump it better. And the first thing that crossed my mind was that I hoped he continued to step, so there was a chance I might be injured, which then became an excuse or a decision I didn't have to make to step away from racing for a little bit. Which, when I got back inside to the weighing room and maybe got in the car on the way home, it became very obvious that that is definitely not a healthy way to be thinking. And the second thing, looking back now, Nick, was that I was no longer the victim in my own world. I was no longer feeling I deserve better, I should be getting rides, I'm good enough. I became the villain. And what I mean by that is everybody I spoke to, my parents, my family, my close friends, I felt I was becoming a burden to them, not only in my issues or problems, but my general everyday. You know, when my dad would check in with me in the evening time about how the day was, it became very difficult for me to actually express how I was feeling in real terms. And this to me is a key point, Nick, that a lot of the messaging right now is you know, if you're feeling down, talk to somebody, and we all need to talk about it, and I 100% agree with that. However, I had gotten myself to such a point that, you know, it was needing something pretty drastic, like stepping away from racing, moving out of the UK, back home, taking up a completely different career. That's what allowed me to get back to somewhat of level terms with myself. And if I could describe it as a way, an analogy I use when I'm working with people now is somewhat of a, you know, we're all in a boat. Every one of us are you know, on a boat in a river, sailing our own journey right the way through life. And life itself, you know, will put holes in our boat. That's what happens every day. You know, whether it's the car doesn't start, or you're late for work, or your boss doesn't do what you want to do, or whatever it is, will put a hole in your boat. Now, healthy people and people that are in a good place with their mental health will have the skills in their toolbox to plug that hole in the boat. However, when you're young or you're in a merry-go-round like what racing is, those holes just continue to come in your boat, and eventually you start to sink. Now, where I had gotten myself to the point was I was no longer in a boat, I was up to my neck in water, and something pretty drastic had to be done to get me out of that. And what we need to do is not necessarily just talk. We need to begin to teach people younger how to plug those holes in the boat before the boat starts to sink, and get the skill sets across about how we're all going to deal with these things as they come, you know.
We're quite well conditioned in society, Kevin, aren't we, to look after our bodies well now, and especially as sportsmen. And you know, the mind, simply your brain, part of your body. It's about time if we look after our brains properly, as we're conditioned to look after our body, then we will be in better position, to use your analogy, to plug those holes in the boat. So it's a question of being aware of everybody's well-being, mental well-being, rather than just providing this as a curative service. Is that what you're saying?
Well, absolutely, Nick. There's a couple of things in that. I mean, one, I don't think, and I mean this sincerely, I don't think I'd have survived my time in racing had social media been as prevalent as it is today. You know, it's racing by its nature is a comparative sport. You know, everybody is comparing everybody to everything. Every horse is compared to another horse. We even cross-compare generations. Every time you read the paper, it's a comparison of one horse to another. You're then, as a jockey, I mean, when I was riding, there was a constant out there that Tony McCoy was going to be champion jockey. Well, my fee and Tony McCoy's fee were the same. So I was constantly being compared to every other jockey in the weighing room. And that then became part of my identity. Was my value as a person was tied into who I was as a jockey and how I achieved as a jockey. And the irony of it all is that we are most inclined to take care of other people's mental health as well. If somebody reaches out to you and to talk to you, more often than not, we will listen to them. As I say, the irony of that is that we quite often don't pay much attention to our own. And like I say about social media, when we're not looking at somebody face to face, or we're not speaking to somebody over the phone, we tend not to really care about the consequences of what we're saying or what we're writing. And I think that's a major change that has happened in the last 10 or 15 years, is that now somebody's opinion and somebody's comparison of you as a writer, as a trainer, as an owner, they are now entitled and have the access to let you know exactly how they feel about you, and exactly how disappointed in you that their money that they had put down and their opinion of you wasn't what they thought it was 10 minutes earlier. And I do think that's a contributing factor to people's mental health today, and something that we should definitely consider, taking more seriously about how we address those things, and not essentially I'd say this to the general public, look yourself in the mirror before you write that message, before you leave that message, and ask yourself, if your son or daughter, your mother, your father, your brother, your sister was to read the message you'd just written, would you still be okay with you being the one writing it? And if the answer is ever no, or if the answer is even maybe it's not the best thing for you to write.
Kevin, finally, we can be much kinder to each other, and you've articulated that very well. How would you advise those who are struggling to be kinder to themselves?
I think that's a great question, Nick. I have a couple of things to say on that. The first thing I'd say is the industry as a whole does do well. However, I think it's time. We have a physiotherapist in the weighing room now. There's a doctor present all the time. I wonder if racing will consider having a mental health counsellor, a mental health professional, as just a permanent in a weighing room now, and maybe there's a monthly check-in for 20 minutes with every jockey in the weighing room, and over the course of time, it's something that jockeys could just get used to doing. And even if you're not a talker, or you're not one to share your feelings, you eventually learn the skills, and we learn where the standard line is with you, and when you're above and below that, it's recognised and we deal with it. The second thing I'd say to the industry is maybe consider doing exit interviews, and not necessarily the day you retire, but maybe 6 months to a year after you retire, to check in with these people. As far as anybody that is not feeling well and maybe considering ending their life, or considering themselves not worth being around, the biggest message that ever did anything for me is realising that nothing is permanent. Nothing. And I mean this in all things that happen in life. There are very few certainties. And the one certainty I can promise you is that nothing is permanent. The sadness you're feeling, the loneliness, the envy, the anger, the jealousy, the isolation, the anxiety, the fear, the darkness, that weight on your shoulders, that boat sinking, is not permanent. And if you do anything today, just promise yourself 24 more hours, reach out to somebody that you trust, and just say the words, "I'm not doing so well," and just see what happens. And I promise you that your load will be lightened, and you'll make it through, because the world is a far better place with you in it than not.
Kevin, thank you so much. Those are lovely words. Kevin Tobin, joining us from his home this morning. And if you've been affected by any of the issues that we've just been discussing, please do contact Racing Welfare 0800 6300 443, or the Samaritans helpline 116 123. We are going to take a short break. When you rejoin me, I'll be joined by trainer Eve Johnson-Horton.